Welcome to Kiss and Chapters, where every story begins with a spark and ends with a swoon. If you love heart-fluttering romances, unexpected twists, and characters you'll root for, you're in the right place. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so I can keep bringing you more sweet, emotional, and unforgettable stories. Let's fall in love with every chapter, together.
Chapter 1: A Different Dawn. When I opened my eyes, the ceiling above me wasn't the white plaster of my small apartment in the city. Instead, intricate wooden beams stretched across the room, polished smooth, carved with curling patterns of clouds and cranes. The faint smell of sandalwood drifted from a bronze incense burner nearby. For a long moment I thought I was still dreaming. The embroidered silk canopy over the bed shimmered faintly in the morning light, and I blinked, almost dizzy at the sight of so much luxury. "Madam, you're awake." The voice startled me. A young maid in a pale blue dress stood by the bed, her hands clasped together, eyes lowered respectfully. I sat up too quickly, and the weight of long, elaborate hairpins tugged at my scalp. My hand flew up instinctively, and instead of the familiar tangle of my short modern haircut, my fingers brushed against an ornate hairstyle heavy with jade and gold ornaments. "What?" My voice cracked. The maid stepped closer, her expression calm as though my confusion was nothing unusual. "Shall I call the kitchen to bring breakfast, madam? The master has already gone to his study." "Master? Madam?" My gaze darted around the room again. Too grand, too foreign, too utterly impossible. And then, like the flicker of a lantern, fragments of memory not my own pierced my mind. A wedding ceremony. Red silk, firecrackers, the deep voice of a man reciting vows. A veil being lifted. A cold pair of eyes meeting mine. I gasped and clutched at my chest. This wasn't my world anymore. I was a normal 25-year-old woman yesterday. A boring office worker who binged romance novels late into the night and lived on instant noodles. I remembered falling asleep, phone still in hand, the screen glowing with the image of the novel's hero, a stoic lord married to a forgotten lady. And now, somehow impossibly, I was her. Lady Lian. Newly married, wife in name only to the cold and distant Lord Shen. The realization sank in slowly, heavy as a stone dropped into a pond. "Breakfast," I croaked, my throat dry. "Yes, call for breakfast." The maid bowed and slipped out. I sat frozen on the bed, heart pounding. Breakfast arrived on a lacquered tray. Delicate dishes of porridge, steamed buns, pickled vegetables. I nibbled without tasting, my mind racing. What did I know about this story? In the novel, Lady Lian was barely mentioned, a shadow at the edges of the narrative. She existed only to show the coldness of Lord Shen, who neglected her for years. Eventually she died young, forgotten. Forgotten. The word echoed bitterly. Oh. If fate had placed me here, I refused to live as a footnote. I straightened my spine, determination sparking in my chest. I didn't know why or how I had transmigrated, but one thing was clear. I was married and I had to survive this strange world. Later that morning I was led to the main hall. Sunlight poured through lattice windows, illuminating the figure seated at the desk. Him. Lord Shen. He was exactly as I remembered from the novel's description. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in austere dark robes embroidered with silver patterns. His face was strikingly handsome but cold, carved like a statue's. His eyes lifted briefly to mine, sharp and unreadable. "You're awake," he said simply. His tone was polite, distant. I managed a nod. "Yes." A long pause stretched between us. The only sound was the faint scratch of his brush as he returned to writing. He didn't ask how I was, didn't offer conversation. It was as if I were invisible, a stranger intruding in his study. My heart sank a little. So this was how it was going to be. The rest of the day passed in a daze. Servants bowed as I walked past, addressing me as Madam. I explored the courtyards, peony bushes in bloom, koi fish drifting in a pond, white stone walkways polished smooth. Everything was beautiful, elegant, and unbearably lonely. At dinner we sat at opposite ends of a long table. Dozens of dishes filled the space between us. Yet we might as well have been separated by 1,000 li. "Is the food to your liking?" he asked at last. "Yes," I replied quietly. He nodded once and silence reclaimed the room. I swallowed hard. In my old life, I had often joked about wanting a CEO cold husband romance. The kind from novels where the distant man eventually melts for the heroine. But sitting here alone despite his presence, I realized how painfully empty such a marriage truly felt. That night I lay awake under the heavy canopy, listening to the distant chirp of crickets. Lord Shen hadn't come to the bridal chamber. He hadn't even looked at me twice. I curled into myself, staring at the embroidered phoenixes on the blanket. "Fine," I whispered into the darkness. "If you won't see me, then I'll make sure you do." A spark of defiance burned in my chest. Maybe I couldn't go back to my old world. Maybe I was doomed to live in the shadow of the novel's forgotten wife. But I wasn't going to disappear quietly. No matter what, I would find a way to carve out a place for myself here. Even if it meant melting the heart of the cold man who was now my husband. Chapter 2: The Cold Husband. The next morning I woke to the sound of birds chirping in the courtyard. For a moment I almost forgot where I was. Sunlight streamed through embroidered curtains, painting golden patterns on the bed. The faint rustle of maids outside reminded me, this wasn't my world, my tiny apartment or my familiar life. This was Lady Lian's world. My world now. I dressed with the help of the servants, layers of silk and ribbons wrapping around me like armor. Every fold reminded me of how out of place I was. In my past life, a messy ponytail and jeans were enough. Here everything was about grace, elegance and perfection. And perfection was exactly what Lord Shen seemed to embody. When I entered the dining hall for breakfast, he was already seated at the table, posture straight, movements precise as he lifted his chopsticks. "Good morning, madam," he said evenly, eyes not lingering on me for more than a second. "Good morning," I replied, forcing a polite smile. We ate in silence. The clink of porcelain bowls and the soft crunch of pickled radish were the only sounds. I tried not to fidget under the weight of the distance between us. Was this how married life was supposed to be? Sitting across from each other like polite strangers? Finally I cleared my throat. "Did you sleep well?" He glanced at me briefly, then nodded. "Well enough. And you?" "Yes," I murmured. The conversation ended there. After breakfast he rose to leave. "I'll be in my study," he said as though I had asked. Something inside me snapped. "Do you always keep yourself so busy?" I asked before I could stop myself. He paused, turning to face me. His expression was unreadable, those dark eyes calm yet distant. "There are always matters to attend to." "Of course. Always matters. Always duties. Always something more important than the woman sitting across from him." "I see," I said softly, my chest tightening. He gave a polite nod, then walked away, his robes swaying with each measured step. I sat there long after he left, staring at the untouched tea in front of me. The day dragged on. I wandered the gardens, tried to talk to the maids, even attempted embroidery, which turned into a tangled disaster that made the girls giggle politely behind their sleeves. But no matter what I did, the emptiness followed me. When evening came, I found myself in the courtyard, watching lanterns being lit. The glow flickered against the night sky, soft and warm, but I felt anything but. That's when I saw him. Lord Shen stood by the veranda, speaking quietly with a steward. His profile was sharp against the lantern light, his features almost impossibly perfect. I wondered, was he born this distant or had life carved him into someone so untouchable? As if sensing my gaze, he turned his head. Our eyes met across the courtyard. For the briefest moment I thought I saw something flicker in his expression. Something softer, gentler. But then it was gone, replaced by the same calm indifference. He inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement, then turned back to his steward. I exhaled, my chest tight. That night I returned to the bridal chamber alone again. The silence pressed in around me, heavy and suffocating. I sat on the edge of the bed, fingers twisting the silk blanket. "This can't go on," I whispered to myself. I wasn't naive enough to expect love overnight. But I couldn't endure being invisible, living day after day as a shadow. If Lord Shen wanted a distant, polite marriage, then fine. But I wasn't going to give up without a fight. I lay down, determination threading through my thoughts even as my eyes drifted closed. If I was truly Lady Lian now, then I would find a way to reach the man who was my husband. Even if his heart was frozen solid. The next morning brought an opportunity one hadn't expected. I was walking near the lotus pond when my slipper caught on a loose stone. I gasped as I stumbled forward, arms flailing. The world tilted, and then suddenly strong hands gripped my arms, steadying me before I could fall. I looked up breathless. It was him. Lord Shen's face was inches from mine, his dark eyes focused sharply on me. For once they weren't cold, they were filled with something startlingly real. Concern. Careful, he said, his voice low, steady. The stones are slippery. For a moment neither of us moved. His hands were still on my arms, warm through the layers of silk. My heart pounded so hard I thought he must hear it. Then he released me, stepping back. His expression closed off again, the softness vanishing like mist in the sun. Be mindful next time, he said curtly, then turned to walk away. I stood frozen, staring at his retreating figure. My arms still tingled where he had touched me. So he wasn't made of stone after all. And that tiny glimpse, the brief warmth in his eyes, was enough to fuel the stubborn hope rising inside me. Perhaps there was a way to reach him. Chapter 3: An Unexpected Warmth. The days in the manor fell into a quiet rhythm. Breakfast with Lord Shen, silent but steady. Afternoons wandering the gardens or trying to learn needlework with the maids. Evenings dining across a table that seemed far too large. It was lonely, yes. But somewhere in the monotony I began to notice little things. One morning I woke with a pounding headache. My temples throbbed as if drums beat behind my eyes. I thought of skipping breakfast, but the maid insisted, leading me to the dining hall. Lord Shen was already there, sipping his tea. His sharp gaze flicked toward me the moment I sat down. You look pale, he said suddenly. I blinked. Was he speaking first? I'm fine, I said quickly, not wanting to admit weakness. Just a little tired. He studied me for a moment longer, then set down his chopsticks. Have the physician prepare medicine for Madame, he instructed the steward. My breath caught. Madame. Not Lady Lian, not she. Madame. His wife. The steward bowed and hurried out. I sat frozen, staring at my bowl of porridge. Thank you, I murmured, almost too soft to hear. Lord Shen gave a small nod as though it were nothing at all and returned to his meal. But my chest felt strangely warm, a fragile thread tying us together. Later that day I returned to my chambers to find a small packet of herbs resting on the table. The maid told me the master had personally checked that the medicine was properly prepared. I held the packet in my hands, staring at the neat handwriting labeling the herbs. It wasn't much. Just medicine. But it was proof that behind his calm, aloof exterior he was watching. He noticed. He cared. For the first time since waking up in this world, I smiled without forcing it. That evening I gathered the courage to speak more at dinner. The lotus pond looks beautiful at sunset, I said, breaking the silence. I walked there earlier. Lord Shen looked up, his chopsticks pausing. It does. My heart leapt. He replied. Encouraged, I continued. Do you often walk there? His gaze lowered to his bowl again. Not often. My duties keep me indoors. I hesitated, then asked softly, would you like to walk there with me sometime? The silence stretched. Too long. Finally he said, perhaps. Perhaps. It wasn't yes, but it wasn't no either. I clung to that single word like a treasure. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake under the silk canopy, staring at the patterns embroidered above me. In my old life I had read novels where the cold husband eventually melted for the heroine. But this wasn't fiction anymore. This was my reality. And I couldn't predict the ending. Still, the memory of his concern that morning, the quiet perhaps at dinner, they lingered in my chest, softening the loneliness. A few days later I had another glimpse into the man behind the frost. It happened in the garden. I had been stubbornly attempting embroidery again, sitting under a flowering plum tree. The thread tangled for the 5th time and I groaned in frustration. I'll never get this right, I muttered. You hold the needle too tightly. I startled at the voice. Lord Shen stood a short distance away watching me. What? I stammered. He approached slowly, his presence steady, commanding without effort. He glanced at the clumsy mess in my lap. If you grip it like a weapon, the thread won't flow. Loosen your hand. I blinked at him, stunned. You know embroidery? His lips curved, almost imperceptibly. I was taught calligraphy from childhood. The hand must be steady. The principle is the same. I stared at him, dumbfounded. This cold, distant man comparing embroidery to calligraphy? I tried loosening my grip and, miraculously, the thread slid more smoothly. It works. I gasped. Lord Shen inclined his head. Of course. And then without another word he turned and walked away, leaving me gaping after him. I looked down at the smoother stitches in the cloth. An unexpected warmth bloomed in my chest. That night when I sat across from him at dinner I caught myself smiling. He didn't smile back, of course. But his gaze lingered a little longer than usual before he looked away. And that was enough. For the first time I thought, maybe this wasn't hopeless after all. Chapter 4. Strangers in the Same House. The manor was alive with murmurs that day. The maids whispered as they passed, their heads bowed, their voices hushed but urgent. I caught fragments, words like concubine and heir. The pit in my stomach grew heavier with each overheard whisper. At dinner I tried to act normal, though my chopsticks trembled faintly in my hand. Across the table, Lord Shen ate with his usual calmness, as though nothing in the world could disturb him. Finally I couldn't stand it. I heard that one of the servants suggested you should take a concubine. The words came out sharper than I intended. Lord Shen paused, setting his chopsticks down. His gaze lifted to mine, steady, unreadable. It was mentioned. My chest tightened. And his brow furrowed slightly as if puzzled by my tone. I told them not to speak of it again. The words should have soothed me. But instead all I heard was the first part. It was mentioned. My heart twisted painfully. The novel I remembered came back to me. How Lady Lian had been neglected, how her existence had been meaningless. Was that to be my fate as well? To sit in this house like a shadow while my husband found warmth elsewhere? I forced a smile, lowering my gaze. I see. Dinner continued in silence, but the food tasted like ash on my tongue. The days after felt different. I couldn't help it, I withdrew. My smiles felt brittle, my words careful. I spent more time in the gardens, laughing with the maids, pretending their chatter was enough to fill the emptiness inside me. I told myself it didn't matter. That I didn't care. That I had no right to expect more from a marriage that wasn't even mine to begin with. But every time I caught sight of him, walking across the courtyard, seated in his study, passing me in the hall, my heart ached with the distance I was helping to build. One afternoon I sat by the lotus pond watching the fish ripple the water. The air was thick with the scent of summer blossoms, sweet and heavy. I heard footsteps behind me. His footsteps. Why do you sit out here so often? Lord Shen's voice was calm, but there was something underneath it. A quiet edge, almost like accusation. I kept my gaze on the pond. Because it's peaceful here. He stood beside me, his shadow falling across the water. You seem different these past few days. My throat tightened. Different. Yes, because my heart was caught between hope and fear, between wanting to believe in him and preparing for the inevitable disappointment. I suppose I realized something, I said softly. He waited, but I didn't continue. The silence stretched. Finally he said, if I've wronged you, you may speak of it. I turned to look at him then. His expression was as unreadable as always, yet his eyes, they searched mine as if he truly wanted to understand. But fear clamped my chest. Fear that if I voiced my insecurities he would only confirm them. So I shook my head. No. You've done nothing wrong. His lips pressed into a thin line, unsatisfied. After a long moment he simply nodded and walked away. I turned back to the pond, tears blurring the water's surface. That night the bed felt colder than usual. I curled into myself beneath the blankets, listening to the hollow silence of the empty chamber. I hated this. Hated the way a single misunderstanding could build walls higher than the ones I had just begun to climb. And yet I didn't know how to tear them down. In another part of the manor, Lord Shen sat in his study, staring at the unrolled scroll in front of him. But the words blurred together, meaningless. His thoughts kept circling back to the image of his wife's brittle smile, the way her laughter reached the maids but never him. For reasons he couldn't name, it unsettled him. He dipped his brush into ink, but instead of writing he found himself whispering into the empty room. Why won't you look at me? Chapter 5. Cracks in the Ice. The days grew hotter as summer pressed its weight upon the manor. The air felt heavy, thick with the scent of lotus blossoms. But between Lord Shen and me the air felt heavier still. I tried to act as though nothing had changed, but the truth lingered in every glance we didn't share, every silence that stretched too long. My heart ached with the distance, yet fear kept my lips sealed. So instead I poured my smiles into the maids, into the garden, into the koi fish in the pond, anywhere but toward the man I secretly longed for. It was on one of those stifling afternoons that everything shifted. I had wandered into the inner courtyard to escape the stuffy chambers. The stone path curved around the lotus pond, shaded by willows. The breeze carried faint relief, cool against my skin. I leaned forward to peer at the fish below, their scales glimmering like jewels. The stone beneath my slipper was slick with moss. And then, my foot slipped. The world tilted. I gasped as my body lurched forward, the pond rushing up to meet me. Strong arms caught me before I hit the water. My breath left me in a rush as I collided against a solid chest. The scent of sandalwood filled my nose. I looked up wide-eyed. His grip on my waist was firm, steady. His brows were drawn tight, his eyes blazing with something I had never seen before. Fear. What were you thinking? His voice was sharp, harsher than I'd ever heard it. Do you not look where you're going? My lips parted, but no words came. He pulled me back onto solid ground, but his hands didn't leave me right away. His gaze swept over me, searching for injuries, lingering too long on my face, as though to reassure himself I was truly unharmed. I'm fine, I stammered at last, my cheeks burning. His jaw clenched. You could have fallen. The words trembled, not with anger but with something else. Something raw. And then, as though realizing too much had slipped through, he released me and stepped back, his expression shuddering again. Be more careful, he said curtly. Without waiting for my reply, he turned and walked away, his steps faster than usual. I stood frozen, heart pounding, my body still tingling where his hands had steadied me. For the first time his mask had cracked. And what I saw beneath it was not indifference. It was care. That evening at dinner, the silence between us felt different. It wasn't cold anymore. It was heavy, charged, almost fragile. He barely touched his food, his gaze flicking toward me more often than before. Each time our eyes met, he looked away quickly as if caught in a secret. I lowered my gaze to my bowl, hiding the smile tugging at my lips. So, he did care. Maybe he was too proud to say it, too guarded to show it fully. But the truth had slipped through in that single moment by the pond. And that truth gave me hope. Later that night, I lay in bed staring at the canopy above me. My heart was restless, tumbling between doubt and anticipation. This man, my husband, was like a fortress built of stone. But even stone could crack under time, under persistence, under warmth. I closed my eyes, clutching the blanket closer. I'll reach you, I whispered into the darkness. No matter how long it takes. And for the first time since waking in this world, I truly believed I could. Meanwhile, in his study, Lord Shen sat alone, brush idle in his hand. The ink on the paper had dried into a blotch, forgotten. His mind replayed the sight of her slipping, the sound of her startled gasp, the way his chest had clenched as he thought, just for a moment, that he might lose her. He set the brush down, pressing his fingers against his temple. This wasn't supposed to matter. She wasn't supposed to matter. And yet the echo of her soft voice, I'm fine, lingered in his ears long after the candles burned low. Chapter 6, Lanterns in the Dark. The manor was quiet that night, hushed under the blanket of summer heat. I couldn't sleep, the restless warmth pressing against my skin like a heavy cloak. Slipping out of bed, I wandered into the courtyard. The moon hung low, its silver light painting the lotus pond in a pale glow. To my surprise, someone was already there. Lord Shen. He stood at the water's edge, his robe unfastened at the collar, the faint breeze tugging at the fabric. He looked softer like this, the usual sharpness of his presence blurred by moonlight. I froze, uncertain whether to leave or speak. But before I could decide, he turned. His eyes met mine and something in them flickered. Not cold. Not distant. Just surprised. Couldn't sleep? He asked quietly. I shook my head. The heat. He nodded, then gestured to the low stone bench by the pond. Sit. I hesitated only a moment before obeying. The night was thick with silence, but it didn't feel as suffocating as before. After a while, I noticed a small basket beside him filled with paper lanterns. My brows lifted. Lanterns? He looked away, almost sheepish. They were left from the summer festival. I thought to release them tonight. My heart gave a little flutter. This stoic man alone in the garden with lanterns? The image was so unexpected, so gentle that I couldn't help but smile. "May I join you?" His gaze lingered on me for a beat too long before he nodded. "If you wish." Together we lit the lanterns one by one. The warm glow flickered against our faces, the flames crackling softly. I cradled one in my hands, watching the light dance across the thin paper. "They say when you release a lantern, your wishes float up to the heavens," I murmured. Lord Shen's hands stilled. "Do you believe that?" I thought about it. About how I had woken in this world without warning, how fate had tossed me into another woman's life. "I think," I said softly, "that sometimes wishes find us when we least expect it." When I glanced up, he was watching me, his expression unreadable, but his gaze so intent it made my breath catch. "What about you?" I asked quickly to hide my fluster. "Do you have a wish?" For a long moment he didn't answer. Then he said quietly, "No." But the way his eyes lingered on me as he spoke made my heart tremble. We stood together at the edge of the pond. I released my lantern, watching it rise slowly, drifting higher into the night sky until it joined the stars. Beside me, Lord Shen let his go. The two lanterns floated upward side by side, their light warm against the endless dark. I hugged my arms to my chest, smiling faintly. They look like companions. When I turned, I caught him looking at me again. His lips parted as if he wanted to say something, but then he closed them, swallowing the words back. Still, the silence between us wasn't empty anymore. It was full. Full of unspoken things that pressed close but not unwelcome. Later, when we returned to our chambers, the air felt different. I lay awake under the canopy, replaying the lanterns rising side by side, the way his gaze had lingered, the almost words he hadn't said. For the first time, I didn't feel like a stranger in this marriage. I felt like, maybe, just maybe, I belonged. And in his study, long after I had gone to bed, Lord Shen still stood by the window, watching the last traces of lantern light fade into the horizon. His chest ached with something unfamiliar, something he could neither name nor deny. For the first time in years, he whispered into the night, too low for anyone to hear. "I think I do have a wish." Chapter 7, Fever Dreams. The rain came without warning. By afternoon, the skies had darkened, thunder grumbling in the distance. Sheets of rain lashed against the manor roofs, the sound a relentless drum that filled every corridor. I had been foolish. Earlier that morning, restless and bored, I had lingered too long in the garden despite the heavy air, despite the warning chill in the breeze. By nightfall, I felt it, my body hot and shivering all at once, my throat dry, my limbs heavy as stone. The fever rose quickly. I curled beneath the blankets, but no warmth soothed me. My skin burned, my lips cracked, and my head spun in dizzy waves. The voices of the maids were distant murmurs at the edge of my hearing. Then through the haze, a familiar voice broke through. Oh, steady, unmistakable. Lord Shen. When I forced my eyes open, he was there. Sitting by my bedside, his usual composed expression shattered with something I had never seen before: fear. "You should have called for me earlier," he said, his voice tight. I tried to smile, but it was weak, trembling. "It's just a fever. It will pass." His jaw clenched. He dipped a cloth into a basin of water, wrung it out, and pressed it gently to my forehead. His hands were cool, careful, almost tender. "Foolish woman," he muttered under his breath. But the words held no anger, only helplessness. I blinked up at him, dazed. "You've stayed." "Of course," he said sharply, as if the alternative had never been a possibility. The fever blurred time. I drifted in and out of sleep, the world swimming in fragments of light and shadow. But always when I opened my eyes, he was there. At one point I felt his hand slip into mine, strong and grounding. His thumb brushed against my palm as though reassuring himself I was real, still here. "You're stronger than this," he murmured, thinking I couldn't hear. "But if you falter, He stopped himself. I wanted to ask what would you do? But my body was too weak, my lips too heavy. So I simply held on to his hand, letting the warmth anchor me against the fever's tide. By dawn, the storm outside had passed, and so had the worst of the fever. My body was weak but lighter, the burning heat ebbing away. When I stirred, I found him still by my side, slumped slightly in the chair, exhaustion etched into the lines of his face. For a moment, I simply looked at him. The man who hid behind walls of stone, who claimed indifference, who now refused to leave my side through the long night. Something inside me softened deeply and irrevocably. I reached out with trembling fingers and brushed against his sleeve. His eyes opened instantly, sharp even through sleep. "You're awake," he said, voice rough. I smiled faintly. "You didn't have to stay." His gaze held mine, steady and unyielding. "Yes, I did." The words struck me harder than they should have, lodging deep in my chest. For the first time I truly believed it. Believed that to him I wasn't just a wife in name, a stranger in his house. I was someone he could not bear to lose. Chapter 8: A Walk Among Blossoms. The fever had left me weak for several days, but recovery came quickly once the rainstorms passed. The skies cleared, washed clean to a brilliant blue, and the air grew warm with the scent of summer blossoms. I had expected Lord Shen to retreat behind his usual wall of distance once I was well. But he didn't. If anything, he lingered more often, checking on my meals, asking after my rest, even walking with me in the garden when I was strong enough to rise. At first I thought it coincidence, but as the days stretched on I realized it was not. He was choosing to be near me. On the morning the peach blossoms bloomed, I found him waiting at the courtyard gate. "Come," he said simply, holding out his hand. I blinked at him. "Where?" "The orchards beyond the manor. The blossoms are in season." My heart stumbled. It was such a small thing, but from him it was everything. I slipped my hand into his. His palm was warm, his grip firm but careful, as though afraid I might vanish if he held too tightly. The orchards stretched wide and fragrant, the trees dressed in pink and white. Petals drifted down with every breeze, scattering like snow around us. I laughed softly as one landed in my hair. "It feels like a dream." Lord Shen glanced at me, his lips curving, so faint I might have missed it if I weren't staring. A smile. A real one. "You suit this place," he said quietly. The words made my cheeks heat. My heart skipped as though those blossoms had taken root in my chest. We walked slowly beneath the trees, the silence between us no longer heavy but calm, companionable. Every so often our shoulders brushed and neither of us moved away. At one point I bent to gather a small cluster of fallen blossoms. I turned, holding them out to him with a playful grin. "For you." He looked at me, startled, as though no one had ever handed him flowers before. Awkwardly, almost shyly, he accepted them. His long fingers curled around the fragile stems, his gaze lingering on the petals before lifting to me. For a moment, the world narrowed to just his eyes on mine, something unspoken passing between us. "Thank you," he said simply. But the way he said it, low, sincere, almost reverent, made it feel as though I had given him more than blossoms. We lingered until the sun dipped low, painting the orchard in gold. On the walk back I stumbled slightly over a root hidden in the grass. Instantly his hand shot out to steady me, his arm wrapping around my waist. I gasped at the sudden closeness, the warmth of him pressed against me. My eyes lifted and his were already there, watching, steady, unreadable, yet filled with something I couldn't name. Neither of us moved for a long moment. Then slowly he released me, though his hand remained lightly at my back until we returned to the manor. That night as I lay beneath the canopy, my heart felt light in a way it hadn't since I arrived in this world. We had walked together, talked together, smiled together. It was ordinary, simple. And yet, it was everything. For the first time I didn't just hope. I believed. In his own chambers, Lord Shen set the small cluster of peach blossoms carefully on his desk beside his inkstone. He stared at them for a long time, a faint crease between his brows. Such fragile things, he thought. They would wither by morning. And yet he could not bring himself to throw them away. Instead he traced a finger over one pale petal and found himself smiling again. Chapter 9. The Words Left Unspoken. The days after our walk in the peach orchard were different. Subtle but different. Lord Shen no longer kept his distance the way he once did. At meals he lingered longer than necessary. When I walked in the gardens he appeared at my side as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Sometimes I caught him watching me, not coldly, not critically, but with a quiet intent that made my heart tremble. I told myself not to hope. And yet, every time his hand brushed mine by accident, every time his voice softened when he spoke to me, hope bloomed anyway. That evening, the manor hosted a small lantern viewing. The servants lined the courtyards with glowing lanterns of every shape and color, their light flickering warmly against the dark sky. I wandered among them, my sleeves brushing against the paper glow, when I felt his presence at my side. "You should be resting," he murmured. I smiled. "I'm well enough now. Besides, it would be a shame to miss this." He studied me for a moment, then gave the faintest nod. "Very well." We stopped at the farthest corner of the courtyard, where fewer lanterns shone and the night air was cool. A silence stretched between us, not heavy, not awkward, but thick with something I couldn't name. Finally I whispered, "My lord, may I ask you something?" His gaze turned to me, sharp and steady. "Ask." I hesitated, my heart racing. The question burned at the tip of my tongue. "Do you feel something for me? Do I matter to you beyond this marriage of names?" But when I opened my mouth, all I managed was, "Why did you stay that night, when I was ill?" His eyes flickered, the faintest crack in his composure. For a moment he didn't answer. Then slowly he said, "Because I could not leave you." The words stole my breath. The lantern light flickered across his face, softening his features. My heart pounded as the silence deepened again, heavier this time, charged with something unspeakable. And then he stepped closer. So close I could feel the warmth of his breath against my cheek. His hand lifted, hovering just shy of my face. His fingers trembled as though he warred with himself over whether to touch me. I didn't move. I couldn't. The space between us thinned, thinning until I could almost believe. A shout rang out from across the courtyard. "My lord! A messenger from the estate has arrived." We froze. The spell shattered. Lord Shen stepped back at once, his expression shuttered, his hand falling uselessly to his side. The distance between us returned in a single heartbeat. Later, as I lay in bed, the memory of his nearness lingered. The heat of his breath, the weight of the words he had spoken. "Because I could not leave you." It wasn't a confession. It wasn't love declared outright. But it was enough to keep me awake long into the night, clutching at the hope that someday, the words left unspoken might finally be said. And in his chambers, Lord Shen paced restlessly, the faint scent of peach blossoms still clinging to his robes. He had almost broken his silence. Almost. But not yet. Not until he was certain he could give her everything. Chapter 10. At last, without walls. The days after the Lantern Festival were quiet, yet heavy. We had both felt it. The closeness that almost was, the words that almost escaped. And yet neither of us spoke of it. He returned to his duties with the same solemn grace, and I smiled as though my heart hadn't been left aching. But the distance felt different now. Fragile. As though one more step forward would shatter it completely. One evening I found myself in the library, the windows open to let in the cool night air. A book rested forgotten in my lap, my thoughts far away. That was when the door slid open. Lord Shen entered, his usual composed air tinged with something restless, urgent. "My lady," he said, his voice low. "I must speak with you." My heart quickened. I set the book aside and rose to my feet. "What is it?" For a moment he only looked at me, his dark eyes searching mine as though the words were caught, struggling to be freed. Finally he crossed the space between us in 2 strides. "You asked me once," he began, his voice rough, "why I stayed when you were ill." I swallowed, my breath catching. "Yes." His hand lifted again, hesitating only a moment before cupping my cheek. "Warm. Steady." "I stayed because the thought of losing you was unbearable." My eyes widened. The walls he always carried, stone, unyielding, were gone. In their place was raw honesty laid bare before me. "From the moment you came into this house," he continued, "I told myself you were only my wife in name. That I would not let you close. But no matter how I tried, you found your way past every wall I built. And now," his voice broke slightly then steadied, "now I cannot imagine my life without you." Tears stung my eyes. My hands trembled as I reached up, covering his hand with mine. "I thought I was alone in this," I whispered. "That I was the only one who cared, the only one who longed for more. I thought you," my voice faltered but I pressed on. "I thought you would never let me in." His thumb brushed against my cheek, tender, reverent. "You are already in," he murmured. More deeply than I ever expected. The space between us dissolved. Slowly, as though the world itself held its breath, he bent his head toward mine. I closed my eyes, my heart racing, and then our lips met. It was gentle at first, hesitant, as if testing the truth of what we had just spoken. Then deeper, surer, the kiss carrying everything we had left unsaid until now. Longing, relief, the promise of something lasting. When we finally broke apart, my forehead rested against his, my breath unsteady. "I love you," I whispered. His hand tightened at my waist, his voice low and certain. "And I you." That night, beneath the soft glow of lantern light spilling through the window, the distance that had once stretched wide between us was gone. For the first time, we were not two strangers bound by circumstance. We were husband and wife. Truly. At last, without walls. Bonus epilogue, a home built on love. The years passed gently, like petals carried by a spring breeze. Our home was no longer just a manor of cold stone and quiet halls. It had become something warmer, filled with laughter, footsteps, and the quiet rhythm of two hearts beating in harmony. On a bright morning, I sat beneath the peach trees in bloom once again. The orchard had become my favorite place, for it held the memory of the first time we truly walked together as husband and wife. A small child's laughter rang out high and sweet. Our son, barely 4 years old, chased after a butterfly with clumsy determination, his little hands reaching and missing every time. "Careful," I called softly, though my lips curved in amusement. Before the boy could stumble, strong hands scooped him up. Still composed, still carrying himself with quiet dignity, yet in these moments softer than anyone else could ever imagine. He held our son easily, steadying him against his chest, and the boy squealed with delight. "You'll never catch it like that," Lord Shen told him gently. "Butterflies aren't meant to be held, only admired." The child pouted, but soon forgot his disappointment as his father pointed out another butterfly perched on a flower nearby. I watched them, my heart full. Once I had feared this marriage would always be a cage, a life of silence and distance. But it had become my greatest joy. He caught me staring then, his gaze softening in the way it always did when it rested on me. The boy squirmed, eager to run again, and Lord Shen set him down carefully before striding toward me. The blossoms swirled around us as he reached my side. Without a word, he took my hand, just as he had on that day so long ago. "Do you remember?" I asked softly, smiling up at him. How could I forget? His thumb brushed over my knuckles. "The day you gave me blossoms. The day I first realized I never wanted to let you go." My eyes stung with tears, but they were happy ones. "We've come so far." He bent, pressing a kiss to my forehead. "And we will go farther still. Together." Our son's laughter echoed through the orchard. The blossoms fell like blessings around us. And in that moment I knew with absolute certainty, this was not just a life I had transmigrated into. It was the life I had chosen. The love I had built. The home we had created. Together.